team for the Partnership on Economic Development. And more specifically, as part of the subcommittee on housing strategy and displacement. Very simply put, we were charged to do one thing and one thing only, and that was to get ahead of gentrification and to manage involuntary displacement here at Woodlawn. It's something obviously that we cannot do without all of you in this room. And again, I want to thank the quadrant leaders and all of the members of the various quadrants who have worked so hard to give us so much of the information that we've used to develop this strategy. And I'm going to try, and my apologies for stepping down because I might have a hard time managing the slide presentation here. But since we started on this mission almost 3 years ago, there's been over $500 million in projects completed or started. Whether it's the Poet Station Lofts or Tryon Lofts, whether it's the new Jewel that's under construction, whether it's the final commitment of the Presidential Library Center. All of these things were things we knew about 3 years ago. We planned for them, we expected them, and now that they're happening, our challenge is to make sure that in the course of revitalization, that we don't find ourselves fighting unnecessarily the battle of displacement. But let's be very clear, and a part of our education here today is understanding what we're saying when we talk about displacement. And more specifically, we're talking about when a household or a family is essentially unable to stay in the community any longer because of the housing cost burden. And we'll talk more about what that means. It's too expensive to stay. The second risk here, obviously, is when a community has to exit because that unit is no longer a rental unit. It's converted to a condo, co-op, call it what you will, but it's no longer available for the renter. And the third, of course, is one that should be familiar to very many of us, and that is what happens if the covenants that keep affordable housing affordable are allowed to lapse. When we think about displacement and we think about the forces, I want to say something that's not on the chart. There are a lot of people who believe that market forces should be allowed to play out no matter what. If you get put out because you can't afford it, so what? But yet we have to remember that the role of community and the role of government is to get ahead of those economic forces and to rein them in. And part of the reason they're reined in is because of something very powerful you have in your pocket today, something no one can take away from you, and that is your right to vote. Your right to articulate, as Deborah Geis and our other quadrant leaders have said, we will be heard and we are being heard. But when we think about displacement, one of the principal reasons communities find themselves displaced is because they attack the problem way too late. So let me make it very clear here. We are not Pilsen. We're not waiting for gentrification to creep up on us. Right. We are not Logan Square. We're not going to find ourselves uneducated. We are not the South Loop. We're not going to up and move. We are Woodlawn, and we're here to stay. How gentrification and displacement happens. One of the common elements here is that government is ineffective in implementing the kinds of policies needed to make sure that it doesn't happen. It has to have not just the capacity, but the will to do what is needed. And part of that is making sure that we're informing them of what the community will is. But some good policies can have bad side effects. So consider, for example, TODs, or transit-oriented development. We all want a smaller carbon footprint. We want and recognize that low to moderate income families spend disproportionately more of their income on energy, whether it's gasoline to get to and from work or what have you. They spend too much. And so there is and remains a huge movement to make more development transit-oriented. But when you do that, and in the course of doing that, you build housing that displaces the poor with more affluent families, then you've created a problem. We're not going to let that happen. Then you have lack of capacity or engagement of community organizations. Is that you? Okay, come on now. Is that you?
No.
Of course not. Then we have access to capital. Money talks. We all know that. No surprise here. When we talk about opportunistic selling and cash buying, if you didn't know it, if we go back to when the recession fell upon Woodlawn, forget about the rest of the city, something happened. We had more foreclosures here per capita than most communities across the entire country. We were classified by HUD as one of the hardest hit communities in the country. If we use 2011 as just one sample year, as we face these massive foreclosures, and I'm a banker, so you know that's a bad word for me, 40+% of all of the homes purchased were cash buyers and non-residents. So that's an indication who owns Woodlawn. And we better be aware of it. And so obviously, as we're conducting our studies, we're looking at all of the data because the right policies have to be informed by the risk and by the economic conditions of our residents. So what do we do to get control of displacement? Obviously, number one is we got to be organized. And that means we're organized, we're informed, we're educated, we're united, and we communicate. And this kind of collaboration means we're not fighting with each other. Again, I thank our Quadra brothers out there for saying, folks, we can't fight with each other, not now. We've got to be united when we go to the city, we go to the county, we go to HUD, we go to IDA, we go to the state, and we say this is what we need in order to best protect the interests of the residents of this community. It means building coalitions. We can't do it alone. And so we certainly recognize and are absolutely reaching across all of the aisles to make sure that our partners, our friends in the park, our friends at Chicago Rehab Institute, all of our friends, and essentially saying, we need your help. So I'm looking at Kathy Gerlach at CIC, our friends Paula Grant and others at NHS, and our champion for Renewed Woodlawn. So if you don't know about Renewed Woodlawn, clap your hands. Low to moderate income people of color. So thank you, NHS. Thank you, Paula Grant. And we got to get you some more money to keep on doing what you're doing. And obviously, you can't talk about a program like Renew Woodlawn without, again, getting back to folks, we got to have the money to make this happen. So, I know this is a really crowded slide. I'm going to tell you after the presentation today, all of this will be, Jada, tell me that it'll be online on the website sometime quickly. But specifically, we had to first figure out in our studies, and let me make sure you understand what I mean by studies. It meant that we pulled together our friends at the Voorhees Center at the University of Illinois. It meant that we went to the University of Chicago and the Harris Policy School, and we got all the resources they were able to afford us. We went to DePaul Institute for Housing Studies. So we had our best research minds, and that wasn't enough. We reached out to UC Berkeley and Harvard's Institute for Housing Studies. We said, tell us what are the best policies being implemented across the entire country? What are the things you look for to anticipate gentrification, and how do you arrest it? Once armed with that toolbox, we began to collect data. We wanted to make sure we had the best data, and we're still filtering it. I can tell you, my wife hasn't complained yet, but the stats get this high that quick. In fact, I just put half of it on Maddie's desk and said, Maddie, I need some answers. And she's been doing this for 20 plus years. I know it's longer than that, but you're only 30, right? And we're going through tons and tons of data, but here's what the data told us. What we anticipated anecdotally, but now we know factually. The most vulnerable communities in Woodlawn are low to moderate and low middle income households who are not accommodated by income restricted housing. They're the most at risk. And we'll talk a little bit later about why that particular segment is at risk. How we intend to address it. We have begun to put together a list of strategies that we are vetting with Commissioner Reifman, Artie Kotak, Anthony Simpkins, and some of the mayor's best lieutenants on housing and community development. We're at the table, as Maddie would say, we ain't on the menu. We're at the table and we're negotiating what we believe are practical, doable policies that make sense for this community. And some of these may be obvious to you, some of them may not, but again, we're looking at an entire spectrum. And if you want to talk about any of these later, we can, but in the interest of time, we're going to move on rather than dwell on this one too long. So we need to understand the risk and how the risks are expressing themselves or emerging here. So here's our reality. Rents in Woodlawn are increasing and increasing rapidly. The DePaul Institute for Housing Studies defines us or characterizes us as a community of moderate cost with an increasing trajectory. That's a polite term of saying costs are going up quick, y'all. The same can be said about housing values. And someone might say, well, that blue line is going down a bit because it reflects what happens when you have opportunistic buyers come in. They buy the lowest cost inventory, the units that were foreclosed on. They get them, they rehab them, and then they put them back on the market. We expect that that blue line is going to traject upwards very quickly, and particularly in the wake of all the great things and the cost of utilities. And we have to solve for all of those. Historically, there have been programs out there, for example, that are available to qualified persons to make home repairs, to make energy efficiency upgrades. We have a whole slew of tax abatement strategies, and more so for seniors than others. And we are looking at that entire slate, particularly of taxes, and are prepared to have the conversation, in this case, obviously, with the county and the county assessor about what we can do. There are, as an example, without being tax specific, there are some strategies that used to be here that aren't there anymore. We have just discontinued certain kinds of tax abatement strategies. We're looking at everything that was, is, and could be, and plan to have that conversation, because we know taxes in particular are a big one. But let's also be very clear, we have an aging infrastructure in many of our homes, and the cost to make those repairs can be well beyond anything that the property value or the homeowner's income will support. We have to solve for all of those.
Question over here.
I'm concerned about a lot of things that you said this evening, Mr. Smith, but when you continue to say the government is going to give us the ability to control, who is the we that you're referring to? Who is the we?
Okay, that's a fair question. So, as in the network of Woodlawn, specifically the Partnership for Economic Development, we at first went to Cook County Land Bank, which is already a vehicle established by both the county and the city to be essentially a receiver for properties that are owned by the city, by the county, by the several federal tax, property owning authorities. And specifically, we have said we would like the city to approve what is the equivalent of a planned development, whereby all of their properties would be wrapped under a set of controls that have been determined by essentially the Woodlawn Partnership for Economic Development via a partnership with a qualified entity. Why the Cook County Land Bank? If the Cook County Land Bank owns all of the properties, they are qualified for some things that we might not get, like relief from the insurance and the tax bill that comes with owning that, and we don't have to come up with the capital. Under the partnership, we, in theory, and by the way, there's a precedence for this. They have one with Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, they have one with LISC. Essentially what happens is we have a set amount of time under which we identify developers to redeploy those assets consistent with a plan that has been endorsed by the community. I could go into a lot more details. We have a 4-page outline of that specific strategy, and I assure you, that's just one of probably 9 core strategies that we plan to advance with the city to get control of those assets.
Is that 4-page analysis strategy going to be made public so we can see?
It will.
We don't have time to get into it, as you said, these are
Oh, absolutely. One of the things we're committing to everyone is we're going to be transparent. So the first draft will probably go to the quadrants. We're going to say, quadrant leaders, are you okay with this? And after we get their blessings, we will go out. We also are being fair. Look, guys, we've got to play it smart. And that means we got to make sure we've got our coalition built, whether it's the city, it's the county, the Cook County assessor. There are a lot of moving parts. Folks, this is like, getting a president elected. You've got to get all of your ducks in order to get your policy not only documented and then make it legal proof. Because anything we do has to also be able to stand the test of litigation in the courts.
That was actually very good. Two parts. One, I don't know if the land bank has.
So do the math. Renters. Low income. Not protected by income covenants. That's a formula for displacement. And then we have, of course, this very uncomfortable reality. 42% of our residents are what HUD would call severely housing cost burdened. That is the combination of your principal housing costs, whether it's your mortgage or your rent, coupled with your utilities and insurance, take up more than 50% of your income. These are families that when the car breaks down has to choose between going to work and eating. Between driving with that door, the car door taped up, versus making a repair. Because they got to keep the heat on. That accident happened in January. These are tough choices. Housing cost burden is a serious issue. 15% of the entire nation is severely cost burdened. 42% in Woodlawn. We got to get our arms around it. So what we know so far is at the risk of trying to oversimplify this, which makes it easier to compel the right kind of policies, we've reclassified these as three different risks. Housing cost burden, which we've got to get our arms around. The lapse of HUD Section 8 or rent controls in our housing, and what are we going to do about that? And I will tell you very narrowly on this. I suggest here that I think it feels very comfortable because of the commitments from our governmental partners that we will get this under control. But let me be very clear. Roughly 42%, another 42, it's not coincidental, of all of the housing we have for seniors and persons living with disabilities have contracts that expire, have already expired, or will expire between now and 2023. That's not good. And we got to get our arms around it. But there's still a larger mass of residents that are looking to us and looking to the city to make sure that those particular housing covenants are continued. We are on that. And then, of course, as I discussed before, rebalancing and how we and what mediums we use to control that. So, as we think about next steps, obviously the subcommittee has to complete its vulnerability analysis. We want to make sure that all the facts we have been appropriately vetted and validated. Because it's too easy to say, well, you missed that by 0.2%, and that's off by a standard deviation. And trust me, there's some folks that are that specific. And as I told my team, I don't care about being perfect. We got enough information to exercise common sense, and we're going to do that. We're going to review and refine, obviously, to confirm all of our data. But equally important, we will be bouncing this information off the quadrants. And so if you're not at the table, don't come crying later that you didn't know about it. And the quadrants are the vehicle that we're using to have this information exchange. And they, in turn, have been critical to our getting that information out to the community at large. And so we're counting on you, and we need your feedback continuously. Obviously, we have to negotiate our strategy with the city and the county. We have to establish project compliance and other elements right here. In other words, at some point, if we get our way, the city's going to give us control of all of its properties in Woodlawn. That's what we're asking for, big ask. I like to get maybe 99% of them. All right? But that's the ask, just being very transparent here. But we would then want to make sure we have the right committee in place to vet those. So a developer says, I want to build 50 new market rate housing units. And Maddie says, you can build 50, but 25 of them are going to be affordable. That's what the committee will ultimately have to do. Unfortunately, we got good partners in the room, so I see Paul back there, wave your hand, who's just been our real champion here for making sure that we have, excuse me, a good balance of affordable. And affordable, by the way, when I say affordable, I'm not talking about just Section 8. I'm talking about workforce housing. I'm talking about the single mom, the single dad that's out there working, earns 50 to 60K a year, paying all the bills, raising the kids right, keeping the kids in school, and struggling every day to make ends meet. We got to protect those families. And then, of course, it means we got to work not only with our city, but with our lenders as well. Say, hey, guys, we need help. And what are the kind of financial strategies we're putting on the table to make sure that projects get done? So, of course, you asked this, we put all this out there, and Pastor's first comment was, that's all nice and good when you don't get it done. I want a timeline. So, we put a timeline out there. And what you see in green is, that's what we've already done. And we're really happy with that. And below the line, you have all these things in yellow. These are the things that are well along. We feel very comfortable that we will meet our timeline. Most of this getting done by the end of April. And then we have these things in red, which are, again, a little bit further off, but not that further off. We have a really tight deadline. We're looking to get this particular subcommittee's work done by the end of May. That's a very aggressive timeline. It's why most of us, quite frankly, we don't have no life after this. It's like going back to, I said, like going back to grad school. I'm working on a dissertation. This is what we do. But we love what we do, and that's why we're here. So, what you should know, a lot of great things are happening in Woodlawn. A lot of great things. So, we're organized, and we have a plan, and that's thanks to you. Home equity is growing faster than the stock market. Hold us side by side. Look at what housing values are doing here. Look at the stock market. You got a reason to stay. Hold on to what you own, and if you're not investing in your own community, shame on you. The quality of life is improving. Did I put it on there? Oh, shame on me. All level 1 schools. Can I get an uh-huh? Uh-huh. Public safety is improving. We are a Curb Chicago best neighborhood 2 years in a row. Number 1 last year, number 2 years. Thank you, Norma. We're getting everybody out to vote. And next year, every one of you should be voting every day on every device you have. Thank you, Norma. The presidential library is coming. Jewel is under construction. Thank you. DL3 Realty, African-American owned construction company. A new state-of-the-art train stop. I hope we'll get here. So, Paula, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. Make it happen. There are a lot of folks who want that. And for our friends in the park, the Gardens of the Phoenix are open. They're absolutely stunning and beautiful. If you haven't been over there to see what is happening in Jackson Park, you got to get over there. It's absolutely stunning. And, of course, an organized community is an advantaged community, and that's you. You're making this happen. And the subcommittee here, where's Vince Lang? Where's Vince? Thank you, Vince. Alyssa, Berman Cutler, Maddie Butler. I want to thank you because these guys have been putting in an awesome amount of time and energy for us to do this work. And of course, to all of our community partners for helping us. So, this is your home, your plan. Thank you, and God bless.